During the 1930s, labor leaders were stereotyped as troublemakers, and working class organizations and trade unions were seen as disrupting the economy. This was their stigma. These perceptions made it difficult to achieve social justice during the 1950s. After June 1937, the report of the Commission on Trinidad Disturbances described Tubal Uriah Butler as a fanatical Negro, as an agitator prone to intemperate and violent language. Fast forward to 2012, 75 years later. Has the public perception changed? Has the public perception really changed? Last month, during a strike, negotiations were aborted. The management bluntly stated, "We will not negotiate with terrorists." Were you surprised by such comments? Public perception hasn't changed. Others in our society still view trade unions as having the intentions to shut down the country, cripple the economy. FITUN has to change such views to facilitate a smooth path to social justice. It would be wise to follow Gandhi's advice that patriotism is not an exclusive concept, but it is all-embracing and concerned about the welfare of all peoples. There are also serious challenges on the horizon. It is a well-known fact that during the 1930s, police brutality was the order of the day. It was used to restore order whenever protests erupted. Furthermore, there was secret surveillance of labor leaders and trade unions in the 1930s. Radicals, trade unionists were being spied upon by British officials and United States officials. I have seen those confidential letters and telegrams. Colonial authorities viewed trade unions and their publications as seditious and a threat to democracy. Men and women such as Elmer Francois, C.L.R. James, George Padmore, and Tubal Uriah Butler paid a heavy price in their heroic battles against colonialism and imperialism. Have this situation changed? We still read of protesters being at the mercy of unscrupulous police and army officers. Last year, it was a shock to me to learn that comrades David Abdullah and Errol McLeod were being spied upon from 2009 to 2010 by the Regional Information Fusion Center based in Port of Spain. And this body is one of the agencies of the CARICOM Implementation Agency for Crime and Security. I feel after today I might be under surveillance, you know. I have a funny feeling too, right? FITUN must speak out against the regular intimidation of journalists. It is becoming too common. I want you to always remember, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and the right to protest is a cherished part of our democracy. Yep. If this freedom is ever absent, social justice will never prevail. FITUN has been influential in our country's politics. Yes, this union party model provides the advantages of allowing workers' grievances and the articulate voices of thousands to be heard at the highest level. But the question I leave with you today: should trade unions be separated from politics? Has FITUN's historical involvement in politics done more harm than good? Has it strengthened trade union solidarity? FITUN must be commended for having distinguished representation in the Parliament. Both the Labour Minister and the leader of MSJ have been conduits to ensure that social justice prevails. Some of their achievements include the presentation of legislation to ensure the extension of maternity benefits, the repeal of the oppressive Masters and Servants Ordinance, which existed since 1938, the conceptualization of a Heroes Park and Museum in Faizabad, and the revival of the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee. This political representation is a vital voice for the working class and a vital voice for FITUN. It is also reminiscent of the 1930s when Labour had a voice in the Legislative Council with men such as Timothy Rudolph, Captain Cipriani, and Rienzi, who dealt with issues as child labour, workmen compensation, and the hiring of foreign labour. FITUN might want to consider some strategies in their quest for social justice. The adoption of passive resistance was successful by Mahatma Gandhi during the 1920s in his protest against British imperialism in India. Similar measures were later adopted by Reverend Martin Luther King with sit-ins and boycotts in the United States to end segregation. And I am glad that Comrade David reminded you all about the boycott of the KISS products. Secondly, and very importantly, I want FITUN to create a public space for regular discussion. C.L.R. James, George Padmore, and Marcus Garvey used Hyde Park in London to discuss the protests of the 1930s and the Italian invasion of Ethiopia. Many of us would know about the way in which Woodford Square, the University of Woodford Square, was used to educate our citizens. Thirdly, and very important also, there is a need for FITUN to have its own newspaper or a segment on radio or television to regularly discuss the issues affecting the working class. I am aware that the OWTU's Vanguard reports on FITUN issues, but there is a need for a separate identity to counteract the apathy of the political directorate and flagrant disregard of the working class. Publications such as the Labour Leader and the People of the 1930s were important vehicles to educate the citizens. Fourthly, continue to build solidarity with NATO and unions such as PSA and other NGOs that might feel sidelined. FITUN should also embrace credit unions more. They are the economic friends of the working class. Learn from the shortcomings of class and race unity from the 1930s. When trade unions, credit unions, and NGOs are united, the working class will be unstoppable, and the government will treat us with respect. Don't ever forget your ideals and commitment to the working class and to the empowerment of citizens. FITUN must never lose its radical and revolutionary voice. Preserve and build on the legacy of the 1930s. Do not disappoint those warriors who have struggled in the trenches and made great sacrifices. If FITUN is silent, and shows a lack of concern, this will be a signal that the battle has been lost. All workers of our land must be given their due recognition, and FITUN must be ready to support their efforts both both for personal empowerment and for national development. I want you to warn exploitative employers. I want you to warn uncaring governments and oppressive security forces that the glory days of the 1930s have returned to ensure that there is bread, justice, and freedom. I thank you.